You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Okay, welcome back once again to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany. We were having some technical difficulties, and we're going to try again and see if we can get this to work. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me now?
I can't. Let's try the other microphone.
Can you hear me now, Eric?
I can, but
we are good. So I'm really excited. It's our last show of the fall semester. This semester flew by, really. And we have Sarah Mountz on today, who is a faculty member at the School of Social Welfare. And Eric is going to introduce her, but she has a very extraordinary level of expertise, I should say, and a lot of experience.
We're thrilled to have Sarah Mountz with us here today at the Social Workers Radio Show. Sarah is an assistant professor here at the University at Albany in the School of Social Welfare. Her research focuses on the experiences of LGBTQ youth in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Her most recent research project, entitled From Our Perspectives, used a community-based participatory research framework to look at the experiences of LGBTQ former foster youth in Los Angeles, California through qualitative interviewing and photo voice methods. We'll learn more about that in a few moments. Participants' photos using this methodology were featured in a traveling art installation that participants helped curate, as well as on an interactive website and in a mini documentary series. We'll learn more about Sarah's work as we talk to her, but I wanted to welcome you to the show, Sarah. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Sarah, you've been here at the University at Albany for a year and a half. But before we jump into all the great work that you're doing here as a faculty member, can we rewind, I guess, and start about where you came from? What university? What was your research like when you were there?
Sure. I came to Albany all the way from sunny Los Angeles, where I had been a faculty member in the Cal State system for 4 years. I was an assistant professor at Cal State Northridge, which was a wonderful experience. And while I was there, I did this research project that Eric mentioned called From Our Perspectives, Untold Stories of LGBTQ Youth in the Foster Care System. It was a community-based participatory research study that I did in collaboration with another faculty member from the sociology department at Cal State Northridge. So we did data collection from 2015 to 2016, and I can talk a little bit more about that study, but just as we were wrapping that up, I made a change and moved back to the East Coast. I'm actually from Poughkeepsie originally, and I had just had a child and wanted to be closer to my family, and I'm really happy to have joined the faculty here at UAlbany School of Social Welfare.
And we're happy to have you on the faculty.
And I'm also a little jealous because you came from California, Eric. You're from California. You went to your doctoral program in California. I got to visit at least once this summer, but I'd like to start off there as we're freezing in Albany right now.
Yeah.
A little jealous about these long times in California.
But
great
say
research.
I missed the seasons while I was there, so that's one asset of being here.
It is interesting, the different, not just weather, but the culture and sort of the differences between the East Coast and the West Coast. And both Sarah and I have made the transition from the West Coast directly to the University at Albany. So, that's an interesting piece to the puzzle here.
But you seem to have done some great work while you were there that sort of prepped you and inspired you to continue that work here at the University at Albany.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm working on a new research project here that I'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But it was really definitely informed by both the research that I did in Los Angeles and my experience specifically in the Cal State system, which has really robust campus-based support programming for current and former foster youth in California.
Great. Can you tell us, I guess before we get started talking about your research, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got interested in social work and how you entered this profession and why social work grabbed you and found you?
Sure, I will try my best because it's hard to know where to start. So I was a youth activist. In high school, I was among a group of students that started one of the first gay-straight alliances at Poughkeepsie High School. And so I kind of came to social work with this youth organizing experience that has really informed the way that I approach research, and also, kind of my social justice commitments as a social worker. In college, I studied psychology and women and gender studies, and I thought that I would become a psychologist, and I've always been really interested in sort of storytelling, and I think I have a natural orientation towards listening, so I ended up holding a lot of people's stories in my life, and I think after I finished college, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I started working with transitional age youth at a shelter for young people who were transitioning from being homeless and trying to become securely housed. And through that work, I really came into contact with other people who identified as social workers, who were trained as social workers, and that sort of made me shift from wanting to go into psychology to becoming a social worker, really because of commitment to activism and to social justice.
Interesting. It's helpful for us to hear sort of where you've come from and that background, certainly in organizing, in community work, in working with youth. Clearly informs a lot of the work that you're doing now, it sounds like.
Definitely.
So let's talk about your work, maybe starting in Los Angeles. So you did this project from our perspectives. Tell us a little bit about what that's about, how it started, and what the importance of it is.
Sure. So I'm going to go back and then go forward, and there's a lot of geographic jumps. So when I was getting my master's degree in social work in New York City, there had just been a class action suit brought against New York City by a group of LGBTQ identified foster youth. And they sued the city for the experiences they were having in foster care, where they were experiencing discrimination, often violence within congregate care facilities at the hands of both caregivers and other youth. And they successfully won that lawsuit. There also was a body of research done by Gary Mallon at Hunter College at that time, and it all kind of converged. And so the city opened congregate care facilities for LGBTQ youth. I happen to have had my first year field placement at a child welfare agency in Brooklyn that at the time was called St. Christopher Ottily's. St. Christopher Ottily, their name is now SCO, and they were one of a few sites that opened up group homes specifically for LGBTQ youth. So I happened to be there at that time. And so they eventually hired me. I became a caseworker. And so I got intimacy with the experiences of LGBTQ youth in the foster care system. It was a huge advance for congregate care facilities to be open specifically for this population, but I still witnessed a lot of what I would actually call human rights abuses by these young people. And so eventually I felt limited in my capacity as a caseworker. I decided I wanted to go back to school and do research that I could use to create structural change. So I got my PhD, and then I had my first faculty position at Cal State Northridge. Around that time that I started, in 2014, the Williams Institute at UCLA came out with a quantitative study that showed that LGBTQ youth were overrepresented in the foster care system. So 1 in 5 youth in the foster care system in Los Angeles identify as LGBTQ. They also found that the majority are youth of color. They found that they had been twice as likely to be placed in congregate care facilities, twice as likely to report mistreatment in the foster care system. And so that was a really radical opening in terms of research, because jurisdictions historically have not collected data about sexual orientation and gender identity. The national reporting databases like FCARS don't tend to collect data about sexual orientation and gender identity. Folks who work in the system tend to, if they're cued into this community, tend to recognize that they're overrepresented, but that gives us a lot of power to know that they're there, that they're overrepresented. But most of the research that's done with youth in foster care doesn't focus on the testimonies of the youth themselves. It tends to be primarily quantitative. This study, amazing study from the UCLA, was also quantitative. And so we wanted to do research that really kind of got into the texture of the experience of LGBTQ youth from their perspectives, hence the name. And also that looked at their experiences of transitioning out of foster care. So we have data that shows us that youth who transition out of foster care are really vulnerable to housing insecurity, to food insecurity, but we don't have a lot of information about the specific experiences of LGBTQ youth aging out of the foster care system.
So are there, I don't want to interrupt, but are there differences, I'm just curious, in, the sort of set of needs that LGBTQ foster care youth may have than other, say non-LGBTQ identifying foster youth? Are there qualitative differences in who they are? Clearly there are identity differences, but are there differences in their sets of needs?
There are differences in their sets of needs based on their differential experiences when they're in the system. So, for example, as people were trying to make sense of the fact that LGBTQ youth were overrepresented, we're trying to understand how this is happening, why this is happening, I think people automatically jump to family rejection. And that youth are entering the foster care system because they're being rejected by their families of origin. I do believe that happens. That was not the primary reason for most of the participants in our study entering the foster care system.
Okay.
So it tended to be the reasons why all youth enter the foster care system. So parental mental health or substance abuse issues. But then once they were in the system, family rejection or foster care provider rejection, caseworker bias tended to impact their ability to obtain permanency, which has a lot of implications for when you age out of the system, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a stable, permanent relationship, then you're much more vulnerable to things like becoming homeless, to not having access to food or health care. And so what we see is more interrupted relationships and more placements while youth are in the foster care system related to their sexual orientation and gender identity. That results in often less stability once it's time for them to age out of care.
Okay. And so it sounds like at least one of the central reasons for doing your research in California then was to find out what their experience was and to share that experience with an external audience so that people could better understand what these kids are going through.
Exactly. And so we chose a community-based participatory research approach and a photo voice methodology specifically. So photo voice is a method where you give cameras to community members and you give them prompts and you say, please take pictures that demonstrate, for example, in the case of our study, your experiences in the foster care system as an LGBTQ identified person, your hopes for the future, and then it provides visual data that can be used in a variety of ways to raise public consciousness outside of some of the traditional ideas of how we think about academic research. So, not just speaking to other academics, but, for example, we curated in collaboration with our youth participants a series of gallery shows that we invited lots of different folks to. And we also worked in collaboration with a group of youth organizers out of the LA LGBT Center called the Ambassadors, who helped us organize an open mic related to the gallery show. And we had, to our first gallery show, 250 people come, many of whom were not academics. They were teachers, artists, DCFS workers, the general public, young people. Sometimes a couple of group homes actually came and attended the show, and so it disseminated information about the experiences of LGBTQ youth to a really wide audience of people, and it also opened doors to share the information in other ways. So, for example, someone who attended the show was an employee at DCFS who invited us to present to all the regional managers our findings. It got picked up by PBS of Southern California. They have an initiative called the To Foster Change Initiative that is trying to bring visibility to the experiences of all youth in foster care. So the study got picked up by them and it got kind of circulated to a wider audience. So had we just kind of gone the traditional route of, publishing in academic journals, not investing, not going about the research in a collaborative way that worked with community members as stakeholders in the research planning and process, then we probably wouldn't have reached nearly the number of people that we did.
I mean, it's interesting to me. It sounds like, amongst many other questions that I might have, that there's very clearly multiple intersections in your work. There's the intersection of, your actual research and the lived experience of the participants that you are working with to do the research. There's the community with which you're engaging, the multiple communities with which you're engaging. But then there's also, I'm curious about sort of the intersection with art and with creativity and things that we don't naturally think of as related to research and to the dissemination of research. But you have, it sounds to me like you have students. Actually, students may not be the right word, but you have youth in the foster care system who are maybe having their first experiences becoming artists and finding ways to express themselves creatively, to find a voice for themselves creatively. And so it seems like you've got multiple phenomena happening at the same time. You've got community engagement, research dissemination, university, neighborhood engagement, service system, as in DCFS engagement, but then you also have youth finding creative avenues for themselves. Can you talk a little bit about art and creativity and sort of how that plays in?
Absolutely. So I think that using photography as a means of capturing experiences is really powerful in a number of ways. So for one, as you just mentioned, art is a really powerful tool for community engagement and community organizing and community capacity building and coming together and sharing stories. So not only were participants sharing their individual stories, they were kind of coming up with a collective visual narrative that was a reflection of their community's experience with each other in relation to each other. And that was really powerful. So when they curated the show, it wasn't just, my individual narrative. It's what story do we want to tell as a community about ourselves. Another reason I think photography and art in general is so powerful is that it touches people in a different place. So in terms of policy change, people feel things when they see an image that's different than they feel when they see a statistic, or even when they hear a story. We did also interview the participants, so we do have, interview data. But when you see an image that a young person has taken, it can just touch you. It activates our neurosystem in a different way that can be really, really powerful. And also, I think in terms of, talking to a group like LGBTQ identified youth in the foster care system who've had multiple layers of trauma, adversity, struggle, you can't always sit and articulate those experiences verbally. We know this, right, as clinicians, and so there is such a thing as art therapy. I think it calls upon that set of tools in a research capacity to kind of birth a narrative that may not be orally communicatable.
Well, Sarah, one of the things that I've been hearing you talk about is how you did research, but and Erica, as you just said too, it expanded. You were able to share the world with the public. You were able to get people to really you were able to break down your resource to many different audiences and show the impact and how they could possibly make change within their organization or with how they train their staff workers, or to know really how to take your research and apply it to making change in their organization or what they do or the services they provide, which is one of the things that I think with our show, how we're always talking about the public is client. How are we able to share our knowledge, share our expertise to different audiences to make that change? So when you were saying that, I was like, that's exactly what one of the missions of our show is. And I just want to know, as a faculty member now here at the University at Albany, how in the School of Social Welfare, where you're teaching students who are going to go out into the field, how does your research tie into how you teach and how we are training these students who are going to be social workers in a year when they graduate, how are we training them now to go into the field and practice if they are going to be working with youth in foster care?
So I teach a course called Human Behavior in the Social Environment. By the way, I love the idea of public as client, and as it relates to your radio show, that's really brilliant. I teach a course called Human Behavior in the Social Environment, sometimes referred to as HBSE, and it's human development across the lifespan. And the curriculum for human behavior in the social environment across social work is really generated from some theories that are quite antiquated. And so I've used the research that I have done both in Los Angeles and earlier research in New York to develop curriculum that specifically talks about youth development from the perspective of youth in the foster care system, from the perspective of youth at the intersection of LGBTQ identity, but also when we're talking about systems involved youth in major urban settings, we're also talking primarily about youth of color, so kind of coming from an intersectional perspective. So it's been really helpful to have this data to be able to translate into curriculum. But I also show, I like going back to art therapy, the ways that we can use things like photography or creative writing if we're working with youth in the foster care system who historically have not had a voice. If you talk to youth in the foster care system, one of the primary things they'll say is that I don't have a voice. I'm drowned out by this bureaucracy, this institutional structure. So how do we work in ways that amplify their voice, that I don't want to say give them a voice, but that collaborates with them to amplify their voice, and from really an empowerment perspective, which is our orientation as social workers. So from a kind of curriculum and practice perspective, that's one thing I feel grateful to have been able to do. A really amazing opportunity that's been provided in coming to UAlbany is the opportunity for the first time to actually be able to teach some of these research methods. So I'm teaching an action research class in collaboration with Hal Lawson in the spring that's open to both MSW students and doctoral students in social welfare, but also other disciplines that really looks at these methods and trains up-and-coming researchers and practitioners to use action research and participatory methods like community-based participatory research and photo voice. So that's a really cool opportunity that's been opened up to me in coming to UAlbany.
So what are some of the differences, I'm going to change directions maybe a little bit, but I think it's related, that you've seen in California and New York? I know, they're pretty different systems of care, pretty different educational systems, obviously different culturally and socially, geographically, et cetera. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about things you learned in California and maybe implications that those things from your research and your teaching in California may have for what you hope to do here in New York State.
Sure. So in terms of LGBTQ youth in the foster care system in general, California and New York are actually the most like each other. And they tend to kind of, I don't want to say they're frenemies or competitive, but they, tend to mirror each other in terms of progressive policy for this particular community. So I would say that they're two of the most legally equipped states for LGBTQ youth in the foster care system, and yet these youth are still experiencing a lot of discrimination, particularly trans and gender nonconforming youth. There's still way ways we need to go in terms of being equipped to justly serve that community within the child welfare system. But in terms of something I'm looking at now, and so a major finding from the research in Los Angeles was that was related to education. So we know that youth in the foster care system have not excellent educational outcomes. So only 50% of youth who exit the foster care system have graduated high school or gotten their GED.
Okay.
7 to 9% graduate with a degree from a 2 or 4 year college.
Wow.
So there's a really big issue of educational justice for this community that has a lot of complicated origins, So in our own sample, what we found was, there's some traditional reasons common to all youth in foster care that make educational attainment difficult. So, for example, if you're moving between foster care settings a lot, it's really hard to accrue the credits that you need to graduate from high school to obtain a degree. If you're constantly changing schools or changing school systems or school districts, you lose some of those credits.
Yep.
Additionally, there's a lot of stigma in public school systems towards youth in the foster care system, and that stigma can impact people's ability to get through school or the support that they receive from educators, from administrators. On top of that, LGBTQ youth in the foster care system are subject to, we now know more about bullying in schools, and so bullying and discrimination from peers or from teachers. And so if you add all that together, it makes for really not often the greatest outcomes for LGBTQ youth who have been in foster care. What I did hear, though, from the participants who had made it to college and successfully, some of them even completed college, was that they'd really benefited from California's campus support program system called Guardian Scholars. So Guardian Scholars is a program that exists throughout most of the community college and four-year college system in California, and it's a campus-based support program. It's often housed in EOP, the Educational Opportunities Program, and it's programming specifically for foster youth that provides academic support and mentorship, but also support around things that are unique to foster youth. So, for example, most foster youth, if they are college bound, age out either while they're in college or right after.
Okay.
And so they need support and information related to that experience of aging out of the foster care system. So when I got to New York, I assumed that there might be similar programming in place, and there wasn't. And so I've been doing some collaborative, again, participatory research right now with our own EOP program and a group of students there who identify as current or former foster youth to try to collect data on UAlbany's campus that will be used hopefully to advocate for some more programming for SUNY students who have a foster care background.
Great.
Sarah, this has been a really great discussion, and we're running out of time, but I want to just finish up with what next? So with all of this research and with everything that you're doing, I mean, you're involved with so much already. What other goals do you have? How else do you want to make an impact? Where do you see all of your work, going next in terms of what you want to do to really be able to take this to yet another level in raising awareness and making change?
Mm-hmm. I think my focus right now is really in two places. One is really feeling strongly that there's an issue of educational justice that's not getting enough attention in terms of current and former foster youth, and trying to do everything we can to improve college accessibility for this community. I think it's a huge social justice issue, and improve high school graduation rates. Mm-hmm. So really focusing my attention where I am right now, which is the SUNY system, but also hopefully eventually working with local school districts to create pipelines for those young people to have greater access to the SUNY system. And then the other area that I'm really focused on and passionate about is improving child welfare services for trans and non-binary youth in New York State and also nationally.
So you are listening to the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show, and if you just tuned in or in the last few minutes and weren't sure who we're talking with, we're interviewing Dr. Sarah Mountz, who is a faculty member in the University at Albany School of Social Welfare. Sarah has been here since the fall of last year, of 2017, and teaches in our undergraduate and master's program in the School of Social Welfare. and has been talking to us about some of her research interests and research work both in California and here in New York State. Alyssa?
Yeah, well, this is really exciting for our last show of the semester because I think it's a great topic to have. And one thing that you said when you were talking about the youth, you said you're not going to say you want to give them a voice, but you want to amplify it. And I think that is that really stuck with me. And also, as we're talking about the show and the public as client and how we like to have guests on and social workers to share their expertise or professionals and how we share resources with the public. That's one of the things people always say, well, I don't consider myself maybe an expert, or I don't know if I could ever go on and share my work. And it's sharing your voice, but amplifying it too. You see things, all the social workers, people that I know that work in nonprofits, they are experts. They know more about their client population, the systems that they work in, and it's just being able to have the confidence and comfort to share that information with the public. And expertise has a way of creeping up on us, and just, you don't always consider yourself an expert. It doesn't mean you know everything there is about the topic, but it means being able to take what you know and, as you have your supervision, as you've been working in the field, and be able to share that. And you've been able to share your research, and you could have, just like you said, published it in an academic journal, which I wouldn't read, I'll be honest. I don't really usually read the academic journals all the time. But I do go to workshops. I do listen to what agencies are saying. I do read newspapers and articles. And you took it to that level. You took it where you were having, artwork displayed and videos made. I saw one of the videos that the youth had made. And that's one of the things that I wish the more people in the profession would do, especially those who are doing research, is take that information, take that content, all that work and research that you've been gathering, and figure out different avenues to reach all the different populations and audiences, and show them how they can use that research, how they can take that knowledge that you spent years getting and collecting, and then make a change with it. Because like I said, it could sit in an academic journal where, quite frankly, not that many people will read, or you can actually take action with that and teach people how to apply it. So I really I think this was a great last show of the semester, because it's exactly, ties into what the mission of this show is. This is about raising awareness, spreading information to the public who might never have considered seeing or using a social worker, or knowing about the resources that are available on different topics that have to do with social justice, social work, and advocacy. So I'm really pumped up now that you've just finished this great segment.
And likewise, Sarah, it's been really intriguing to hear about your work, and I knew a little bit about it, but to learn more about it. And, for me, one of the pieces that really resonates is certainly, as Alyssa said, the amplification of those voices of people whose voices have not been heard. I think that's really important, but also this piece about artistic expression and having us, not to sound too highfalutin, but as a society, thinking about how people express themselves and how people develop a voice and become who they ultimately should become or can become, that sometimes art and artistic expression can be a pathway to that, particularly for youth, for whom sitting and maybe talking in counseling or therapy or in traditional clinical avenues or talking to a medical provider is just not going to work. It's not a strategy that has been shown to be effective for reaching certain populations, but finding non-traditional ways to help individuals, to me, is just incredibly exciting. So I wonder, just as a last question, have you thought, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you thought a little bit about how some of those non-traditional avenues for expression, like art, like storytelling, maybe open mic, things like that, how some of those things might be useful here in the Albany area? I'm collaborating right now with a group of, as I mentioned, foster youth in the EOP program, and we just finished an interview guide that we're going to use to conduct a focus group. We've talked about the possibility of using photo voice as a methodology in that study. I am following the lead of
the young people, the students that I'm participating with, because that's what it means to do research and collaboration. So I don't know what methodology they'll end up choosing. But one of the things that we've talked about is the need to enhance awareness across every, they call them units here, or program or system on campus. So financial aid needs to better understand the experiences of youth in foster care. Advising needs to better understand the experience of youth in foster care. The counseling center, professors. And so a really powerful way, I think, to raise awareness about what the experiences of foster youth on UAlbany's campus would be to have another photo voice show where they are sharing data that is really accessible and powerful and touches people. But again, I am following their lead, but that's one possibility that we've talked about.
Yeah, and maybe part of what intersects between your work and what Alyssa and I do here at the show is also thinking about, for those different units on campus, or even stakeholder groups, communities within the larger Albany area, is that multiple avenues of reaching people in the future is the way to go. So thinking about radio as a medium, thinking about the internet and social media, thinking about newspapers, thinking about blogs, different ways to reach different groups, and that's part of what I'm thinking about. Part of what you've encouraged us to think about here is that art, music, storytelling, lots of things I'm not even thinking of, other avenues, maybe ways to spread that message, whatever the message may be, in ways that are more meaningful than the traditional ways of sharing information.
Yeah, I've talked to some folks at the Albany Public Library about the possibility of doing a photo voice show there, where so many different people are walking in and out, and in terms of eventually collaborating more with local school districts and people in the community to, again, promote educational justice for foster youth in New York. I think that sort of thing has a lot of promise.
Great. To me, this is so exciting, because this is research that makes a difference. It's not research that, as Alyssa said, is done just to publish or just to generate knowledge, but it's really generating knowledge for the sake of social change and for helping those communities who don't have a voice or who aren't naturally heard by the rest of society. And I'm really impressed by the work you're doing and by the meaning of that work, the importance of that work.
Thanks so much.
And thank you again for being on the show. And if anyone would like to be on our show next semester, if you're you don't have to be a social worker, but if you're are a social worker working for a local nonprofit and a UAlbany social work alum, if you have a social work topic or a social justice topic that you would like to share your voice or, amplify or raise awareness about an issue, please contact me, Alyssa Lotmore, ALOTMORE at albany.edu. And I'd love to have a discussion about, how this could add to the show and share some resources with the public.
And while we're talking about how to reach folks, maybe, Sarah, if you've been listening to this interview and if folks have been, if our listeners have been intrigued by your ideas, how might they be able to reach you, and how can they find out more about some of the issues that we've talked about today?
Sure. I am reachable at smounts at albany.u, so SMOUNTZ at albany.edu, and I'm always happy to hear from people.
And
Great.
You can find this episode if you want to share it, or old episodes. We have a YouTube channel, but you can always follow us on Twitter, Social Workers FM. And and I'll also post a picture, because I'm just realizing Eric and I have pretty much matching checkered shirts on today. So I will post that picture on our Twitter account as well. I just realized that as I'm standing here. I'm like, oh, this looks wonderful. I'm glad we're not on air where people can see us. But so, yes, there's lots of different ways. But please do listen to old episodes of our show as we head into intercession. And up next, we will be airing the new UAlbany podcast, and we'll be showing one of the recent episodes that was recorded, and it should be an exciting one. So stay tuned.
Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show on WCDB Albany.